Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture. So in today's lecture, we'll talk about demand and supply and demand functions and supply functions of commodities. And we also try to understand how demand and supply they are behaved in case of public policy, or in other words, in public policy, how do we perceive demand and supply and the price. So in case of utility, we also try to understand how public policy is framed while analyzing the utility of various commodities, and then how public policy, if public policy is good, then what would be the utility of public policy. So in this today's lecture, we'll be talking about demand, supply and its equilibrium. So we'll begin with demand and then we'll proceed further, and then we'll try to understand from public policy's point of view. So the first point of discussion, I would say that departure point for in case of public policy, like how do we consider public policy, or how do we see public policy? So if we can think that public policy as a commodity, if you can consider public policy as a commodity, then how one should consume that commodity, and what would be the demand, and what would be the price, and who sets the price, and who actually demand for public policy. So in the market as a place or space is very important to understand demand and supply. So if we see that public policy as consumable commodity, then of course citizens will demand for it and government will supply. uh, so now these are the characteristics that we have to remember when we conceptualize public policy as commodity. The first point is non-market nature. Like, it is not always important to have marketplace for commodity. So it cannot be you can't imagine, we can't imagine a public policy as a commodity, that we go to any of the local markets or any of the shopping malls and then buy it, or supermarket. So for public policy, marketplace has to be defined or to be understood in various ways. That is the first point, that one has to keep this in mind. The second point of the characteristics is like collective consumptions. It is not only about one person is consuming. It is about the collective consumptions, whether it is public hospitals or whether it is public schools. It is basically all about how people are actually consuming collectively. Likewise, even private schools or private hospitals, so those are also part of the policy. Then political mediations are very important, and therefore even in the public policy domain, we also talk about political economy of public policy, and also behavioral economics of public policy, like behavior of individual politicians, the way it is important. At the same time, entire ecosystem of the political climates of any nations are also very, very important for understanding public policy, that we already discussed in our earlier lectures. And heterogeneity, like that is in public policy, heterogeneity is very important. Like various groups, various strata of the society will be the consumer of the public policy, and therefore nature, locations, these are also very important when we discuss about public policy. So when we look at public policy as a commodity, so it has some of the inherent characteristics of any commodity, like any tangible goods that we consume. But then public policy also has some other factors, like political mediations, heterogeneity natures. So these are also like some of the indicators which are also very important to consider. So in Buchanan and Tulloch's classic publications on public choice theory, where they explain that how policies emerge as a result of competing interests, like interest of various groups, interest of various people, interest of various interest for the nation, and incentives. So incentive is also one of the most important factors for the price setting um, in also in economics. So therefore in public choice theory, the way public policy was perceived or viewed, it is as outcome of interest and incentive. So these are two important points of the discussion while imagining public policy as a commodity. uh, Now let's see like how what is demand. Like there are various ways and various types of demand that we imagine. So what is demand? So demand could be individual demand for a commodity, or market demand. And then individual demand, we have if n number of populations are there in the market, and every person has its own demand, then horizontal summation of all the demands will be considered as um, market demand. So that we know from microeconomics course. And also there is a difference between direct demand and derived demand. So we, as a student of economics, we already know that direct demand, when we directly demand for certain goods, then that demand is called as direct demand. Like say I'm demanding demand for wheat or rice for my lunch. So that is a direct demand. So derived demand, one example that can be considered, that is used in very standard microeconomics books, is like sugar. Like demand for sugar also will lead for demand for sugarcane. So sugarcane is a derived demand. In case of joint demand, it's like for instance, I'm demanding for pen, but then after use of the pen, or pen will be useless if I don't have the ink. So ink and pen both are like although I'm demanding for pen, but then indirect demand also will be ink, but in this case direct demand. So it is basically joint demand for pen and ink. So now composite, in case of composite demand, like certain goods that we demand for, but that can be used for multiple purposes for consumption. For instance, milk. So from milk we can also drink milk, or we can also make kheer out of it, or we can also make curd out of it. So one particular commodity, but then can be used or can be made various commodities from that particular commodity. So this is called composite demand. So there are various factors which influence demand, and let us first discuss. Although in our utility lecture we already said that in economics, especially in economic analysis, there is one assumption that is important, is called ceteris paribus, like all other important factors will remain constant to understand um, or to understand the effectiveness of two commodities and their interactions to each other. So trying to understand the relationship between two factors or two commodities, and keeping all other factors which have prospective influence on the two factors, we are keeping them as constant. So in this case, these are the factors that are influencing the demand, is like needs and preferences. Like citizens demand healthcare, education and welfare programs, like various social insurance, social assistance programs. And then taxations, for instance, lower income groups demand redistributive policies, while higher income groups may demand for tax cuts. Like these are the factors which actually influence. Like tax has a influencing power on the demand. Likewise needs and preferences. Like festive seasons, like during festive seasons, for instance during Dashera or Diwali, sale for sweets or demand for sweets become more, or lights, demand for lights become more as compared to non-festive seasons. Demographics also very important, like for young population, job as a commodity is more important than anything else. Or for instance, for senior citizens or aging population, demand for pension is very normal. So these are different groups or different demographic groups will demand for different set of commodities. External shocks are very important these days, and we have witnessed several extreme events, whether it is environmental related, or say wars, or say health crisis like pandemic, during COVID-19, and then demand for vaccine has gone up because of the pandemic, and also war weapons, demand for war weapons becomes very high. And then for climate change, for instance, also has immense sort of influencing power on the demand for certain goods and services. So now when we say that demand function for public policy, so I'm not saying that demand function for any commodity. So here we are directly writing that demand function for public policy, and it can be written as say DP. Here DP is demand for public policy, Y is here is income of say people, N is demographic compositions, and Z is external shocks like pandemic or extreme events of environments, or say war. So this is how we also have witnessed even during lockdown. There is a high demand for private vehicles services, and therefore we also have witnessed, especially in India, that price for transportation cost has gone up tremendously. So those are due to external shocks, but then demand for transportation. So when we imagine external shock, nowhere transportation cost comes. So in for instance, say COVID-19 and the vaccine, those are very closely related, like during any health crisis, vaccination of course, but then nobody could imagine that demand for transportation during lockdown as an effect of health crisis also will go up. So these are the factors which influence or construct the demand function for public policy. However, we'll discuss much more in details as we proceed. So now let's derive an individual demand curve from utility. So we already know, and we also have have done how to derive utility curve between two commodities like say X and Y. So let us try to understand how to derive individual demand from their utility. So individual demand is also coming from individual utility. So if I consume two commodities like say X and Y, so I will be rational enough to draw my highest level of satisfactions from X and Y, and then therefore sometimes I may get more Y or X at cost of others. Therefore marginal rate of substitution, and this we already discussed. So now how do we derive this and try to connect with the demand function? So now again 2D model, two axes like X here and Y here. So two commodities, and we are assuming X and Y are normal goods. So now there are various possibilities that we discussed on which utility will be changed, and also budget line is changed. For Y, we have the price, what we call PY for Y, and PX is the price of X. So now what would be the budget line? So say budget line is like A, B. Now assume one commodity becomes cheap and say commodity X. So X becomes become cheaper, and therefore we get, say, px dash is less than px from the original. So in how this will impact on the budget line? So budget line will be flat, and therefore b1 with px price, and here px. Of course, assumption is keeping all other factors remain constant here, like, and here only, say, commodity, say here commodity x, becomes cheaper, and therefore it will reflect on the price of x. It becomes further cheaper, double dash, say point a b double dash. So here the utility that I'll have e1, say small e1, and I'll get the higher utility u2, say e2, and then here u3, which is e3. Of course, u3, u2 is giving us higher utility, and with the transitivity rule wise, of course, e2 is higher, giving higher utility than e1, and e3 is giving higher utility than e1 and e2, right? And this is due to fall in price of commodity x. So now, in case of demand, so let us draw this. So this is, say, panel 1 for utility, and here we are trying to establish the relationship between quantity x, and here y we are not we are keeping y constant. Here there is no change from the earlier sort of assumptions, like it is only between x and y, but then our demand over x is changing, not on y, because we are keeping all other factors constant. So, and then this change, quantity of x is actually changing because of the price, and therefore in the panel 2 we are actually trying to establish the demand function of the individual, and here the relationship that we are trying to establish is like x and between x and px. So you see here, like the first, so here quantity that we got it from our utility 1 is like x1. So in x, similarly with this x1, assume that price was px. Then we reached in the higher utility level. Why? Because commodity, we consume more commodity. Why? Because price has fallen from the previous one. So say here p x dash, say here at this point, and here at this point, the initial, our initial price and quantity relationship, and further, due to further reduction in the price of x, our utility, I mean, we started consuming more x, which is from 0x1 to 0x2, now from 0x2 to 0x3 amount, like larger amount of quantity of x, and we also have more utility. So we are on the higher utility curve, which is u3, and this was possible because of the reduction in the price. So in case of normal goods, so here say this one that we get, another one combination of price and quantity, say here small a, this one is small b, and this one is small c. And if we plot this, so demand function, we get the individual demand curve, like say dd here, for commodity x. So demand curve is nothing, it is the combination of all the points, or all the points of different combinations of price and quantity. So this is how one can actually understand or derive demand curve from the utility. So and this E1, E2, E3, these are the optimization points where utility, like marginal rate of substitutions for x and y is equals to price ratio, because here these are the tangent points where utility and budget line, they are kind of getting equilibrium. And with this, from this utility we can establish the relationship between quantity and the price. So this is one of the cases that we had taken, like when a good becomes cheaper. The similar way, with a similar logic, we can also make the derive the demand function when a commodity becomes expensive. So now there are two ways in which we should remember, and these are the points of remember. One is quantity demanded, and the other one is change in quantity. There are difference aspect and cause. So first let us talk about change in quantity demanded. So what could be the cause for this? It's like change in the price or cost of policy. So if changes in the price, it happens, like if a commodity becomes cheaper or expensive, then we will either consume more in case of in case of goods becomes cheaper, and will consume less if a commodity becomes expensive. So it is basically moving along with the demand curve. The other one is like external shocks that we discussed, changes in the income that we discussed, is basically if we have the higher income, then obviously my demand function will completely shift. Either in case of higher income, it will shift rightward, and in case of lower income, it will shift inward. Suddenly if government decides, like let's have a lower premium for insurance, then obviously demand for insurance will go high. People will try to buy more and more insurance. That's on the other hand, for instance, due to external shock, like due to COVID-19, a lot of, we have witnessed that many people, they lost their job in the urban informal sector, and we have seen that people. Now the second case where we will discuss, like changes in the demand. So just again we have plotted for any commodity, like say commodity X here, commodity X here, then price of commodity X, and then quantity demanded for commodity X, and then say initial demand was D1, and then due to change in the income, it has gone up, and then our demand curve has shifted rightward. And this is how the two cases that we tried to kind of explain here is like changes along with the demand curve, and then on the right hand side, changes in demand. Okay, so these are the 2 points. So now there are different types of commodities. Let us also try to understand, because policy also depend on this, the kind of commodities and the kind of goods that we are talking about. So in case of free goods, like goods that have no production cost, they are normally considered as nature, like air, water, river, sunlight. So of course we also have some other other examples for that, but then generally the natural resources, some of the natural resources like or some of the goods which are connected with the associated with nature are free. So those goods are referred as free goods. Public goods, like goods that are commonly used and are benefited to everyone, like for instance public hospitals, public schools, national parks, or any other like which can be used commonly. So those are referred as public goods. And economic goods and services, where a cost of production is involved by the private producer. So and those goods are called economic goods. And then tangible, it could be tangible or intangible. So I'll stop here. So the reference for this book could be, these are to begin with, and then we'll also give you more references, especially when we talk about different component and aspects of economics and its relation to public policy. So thank you very much for your attention. So we'll see you in my next class.